Oh, hey besties. Have a Benzie. I am, of course, just sharing drugs as a friend and not prescribing them to treat or prevent any kind of illness because I'm not a doctor. Or would you look at me? Showing more responsibility and professionalism than today's subject, and I am literally on drugs. So, we all know Dr. Jordan B. Peterson from his greatest hits. His brave stance against pronouns, crying about Olivia Wilde, eating so much meat that he turned into a vegetable, crying again but about Antifa, wearing a Party City fedora and ranting about women not liking nice guys on public access television, crying again about some other stuff, and getting his shit absolutely wrecked by some apple cider vinegar. But before he was God King of the Incels, before he was Old Man Cries at Cloud, before he was Dr. Quinn Medicine Wojak, he was a professor at the University of Toronto and a clinical psychologist with a private practice. He shuttered his private practice in 2017, but he still publicly identifies as a clinical psychologist, which is kind of a problem now that he's pushing a buttload of dangerous conspiracy theories. And it's a big enough problem that the College of Psychologists of Ontario, the CPO, has launched an investigation into Peterson after receiving a number of complaints regarding his comments on social media. Because even if he doesn't currently have a private practice, it's considered bad form for mental health professionals to tweet about how fat women will never be beautiful or encouraging people to krill their shelf. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's clinical and academic credentials are legit. He boasts a PhD in clinical psychology from McGill and has lectured as an assistant professor at the psychology departments of both the University of Toronto and Harvard. But in the same way that Dr. Ben Carson's achievements in the field of neurosurgery don't qualify him to speak with authority on Egyptology, Jordan Peterson's background in clinical psychology doesn't qualify him to speak with authority on climate science, nutrition, biology, or makeup artistry.
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
Rouge? Why is he talking like an 18th century dandy? Why is he talking about sexual arousal while describing his daughter's signature look? Michaela, please explain how contouring works to your weird dad. Actually, on second thought, maybe don't. So one of the chief issues that the College of Psychologists of Ontario, the CPO, I'm not saying all that again, takes with Peterson's tweets is that he's potentially weakening the credibility of the field when he uses his public platform to espouse pseudoscience. He's leveraging his academic background to lend credence to conspiracies and mistruths, and in academic and clinical settings, that is generally looked down upon, who'd have thunk. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Dr. Peterson's past and current work and try to answer the question at the center of countless Quora and Reddit posts. Is Jordan Peterson a good psychologist? No, he's not. He's trash. When Jordan Peterson first interviewed for the assistant professorship at the University of Toronto, Professor Emeritus Bernard Schiff described fighting to offer him the position.
I pushed for him because he was a divergent thinker, self-educated in the humanities, intellectually flamboyant, bold, energetic, and confident, bordering on arrogant. I thought he would bring new excitement along with new ideas to our department.
However, Schiff's colleagues at the time were concerned that the 36-year-old Peterson was too eccentric. Eccentric, in this case, refers to his kooky, unconventional relationship to things like oversight and ethics.
He was, however, more eccentric than I had expected. Even though there was nothing contentious about his research, he had objected in principle to having it reviewed by the University Research Ethics Committee, whose purpose is to protect the safety and well-being of experiment subjects. He requested a meeting with the committee. I was not present, but was told that he had questioned the authority and expertise of the committee members, and insisted that he alone was in a position to judge whether his research was ethical and that, in any case, he was fully capable of making such decisions himself. He was impervious to the fact that subjects in psychological research had been, on occasion, subjected to bad experiences, and also to the fact that both the Canadian and United States governments had made these reviews mandatory. What was he doing? I managed to make light of this to myself by attributing it to his unbridled energy and fierce independence, which were, in many other ways, virtues. That was a mistake.
Let's take a peek at one of his lectures where he mentions the issue of ethics.
So they did a plot analysis of the typical pornographic female fantasy. Well, and it's so comical because engineers did this and social scientists would never do this because they'd be probably too concerned about the ethics of it or some damn thing. But engineers, you know, they'll just plow ahead with no concern whatsoever for such things, and they actually discover things that way. And so
he's like, those engineers get stuff done because they don't worry about a little thing like right and wrong. I don't think I want to use anything designed by an engineer who isn't concerned with ethics, but okay. Let's hear him tell us the very real stats of the 5 kind of monsters women want men to be for some reason.
Vampire, werewolf, billionaire, pirate, and surgeon. Well, first of all, there's a dominance thing. Now you're actually blushing, you know, you're actually blushing about that. That's very, very funny.
Creepy old dude talking about how books are smut now based on a study he said his department would find unethical, and singling out a student who is blushing. Not weird at all. But back to Schiff. Dr. Peterson's actual work as a professor of psychology also came to strike Schiff as suspect.
Another thing which I did not give sufficient concern was his teaching. Jordan presented conjecture as a statement of fact. I expressed my concern to him about this a number of times, and each time Jordan agreed. He acknowledged the danger of such practices, but then continued to do it again and again, as if he could not control himself. He was a preacher more than a teacher.
Following Jordan Peterson's opposition to Bill C-16, the trans one, and his star rising as the professor against political correctness, Schiff observed a disturbing decline in Peterson's ethics in relationship to the truth.
I have been asked by some if I regret my role in bringing Jordan to the University of Toronto. I did not for many years, but I do now. He's done a disservice to the professoriate. He cheapens the intellectual life with self-serving misrepresentations of important ideas and scientific findings. He has also done a disservice to the institutions which have supported him. He plays to a sort of victimhood, but also plays the victim. When he caused a stir objecting to gender-neutral pronouns, he thanked his YouTube followers, who had supported his work financially, claiming he might need that money because he could lose his job. That resulted in a significant increase in monthly donations. There was no reason to think he would lose his job. He was on a sabbatical and had not even been in the classroom. The university sent him a letter asking him to stop what he was doing because he was creating an environment which would make teaching difficult, but there was no intimation that he would be fired. I saw that letter. Jordan may have, however, welcomed being fired, which would have made him a martyr in the battle for free speech. He certainly presented himself as prepared to do just that. A true warrior, or whatever.
A true warrior, whatever. Sick burn, Bernard.
Later, when his research grant was turned down by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, Jordan told the world he was being punished for his political activities. There was no such evidence. Jordan, however, took this as an opportunity to rail once again against the suppression of free speech by oppressive institutions into a public relations triumph in the eyes of his followers. The Rebel, as Relevancy's far-right online publication, raised the funds to replace that grant.
Around this time, while he was still a tenured professor at UofT, Peterson started a Patreon. For those unaware, Patreon is a site that allows people to financially support artists and creators, usually offer rewards and incentives for that support. Like, for instance, your name in the credit of videos, or ad-free versions of videos, or this video having an extended cut for patrons. At least that's what I offer on patreon.com/Caelan Conrad. Was that subtle enough? You know what? I'm too poor to be subtle. You get down there and you smash those subscribe and like buttons like they're cockroaches scuttling towards your last edible. But unlike my super ethical and reasonable rewards and tier levels, on Jordan Peterson's Patreon, things were a bit more questionable. Patrons subscribed at the $200 a month tier were eligible for a private 45-minute Skype session with a licensed mental health professional, which, while not explicitly therapy, sounds a lot like therapy. $200 for under an hour with a therapist is what most people think of when they say therapy session. And many of Peterson's fans became fans because they found themselves troubled, distressed, and in need of guidance, which muddies the waters between celebrity meet and greet and structured therapy session even more. In 2018, one of Peterson's former patrons at the $200 a month level posted the audio of his session online. The original poster has since taken it down due to the backlash Peterson received, but unfortunately for everyone who has ever posted anything, nothing on the internet is ever truly gone, and I was able to find it. In the interest of protecting Peterson's former patrons' privacy, I'll be using a pseudonym. Please just leave this weird man alone. I probably should have came up with the pseudonym first. Let's call him Carl Popper. No, that's already a man. Carl is, like a lot of the men drawn to Peterson, white, straight, probably intelligent, listless, and angry. At the time of the session, he'd left the UC Berkeley engineering program because he felt overcome by liberal dogma.
They were teaching in classrooms things like Martin Luther King Jr. would have supported violent rebellion, and marriage is an institution that is designed to control the sexuality of young women.
Carl, who was unemployed at the time he was a patron of Peterson's $200 a month Patreon tier, expressed anxiety over looming homelessness and at his place in society.
I'm really hoping that somebody's going to recognize my talent.
Throughout this, shall we call it, therapeutically coded session, Peterson lacks the kind of neutrality, or attempts at neutrality, that most psychologists strive for. He nods along as the patron goes on about a paper he's writing and the correlation between recent socio-cultural transformations and dropping sperm counts. When Carl starts to complain about women finding marriage oppressive, Peterson launches into a rant.
So I don't know who these people think marriages are oppressing. I read Betty Friedan's book because I was very curious about it. And it's so whiny, it's just enough to drive a modern person mad to listen to these suburban housewives from the late 50s ensconced in their comfortable, secure lives complaining about the fact that they're bored because they don't have enough opportunity. It's like, Jesus, get a hobby.
The two volley back and forth about women, liberalism, and the West. When Carl admits,
it would be nice to not be homeless anymore because, it's like, it'd be nice to have a place.
Peterson responds saying,
You don't have a future and you don't have a job. It's no bloody wonder you're anxious. That just means you're sane.
A psychotherapist and lecturer at the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration writes in an article for Salon.
It is unclear to me what a session with Peterson really offers, other than confirmation of that which the participant is already aware. Carl doesn't seem to grow in his self-knowledge, nor experience any insight during the course of his conversation with Peterson. When Carl mentions feeling anxious, Peterson tells him that his anxiety is warranted. You don't have a future, and you don't have a job, and no bloody wonder you're anxious, he says. That just means you're sane. Therapy should never fill a patient with false hope, but neither should it make you feel as if the future is foreclosed against you. In this exchange, it seems like Peterson is attempting to use Carl as a support for his ideological view, rather than help Carl grow. Most troublingly, Carl is experiencing real distress. He's aimless, unemployed, overeducated, and functionally homeless. He could use a real therapist, but that's not what he gets. Instead of letting him fill the hour with ramblings, a good therapist would redirect him to concerns that caused him to seek help in the first place. We would all rather talk about pointless musings than confront our anxieties and fears. But by letting Carl focus his time on sperm counts and submissive wives rather than his more immediate concerns, Peterson does him a great disservice. When he finally does intervene, Peterson refocuses the session on himself and his own thoughts. The great British psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott once said, "I interpret mainly to let the patient know the limits of my understanding." Peterson interprets in an attempt to show off his.
Then, there's the issue of money. The 45-minute Skype session was a one-off benefit, but only offered at a monthly tier of $200. Posts to Jordan B. Peterson's subreddit suggested that the waitlist for the sessions was often months deep, meaning that by the time someone had their 45-minute session, They had possibly sunk many hundreds, if not possibly thousands of dollars. Money that many young men like Carl can't afford to spend. But they do because they're desperate, and Peterson markets himself as having the answers to their problems. And he uses his background in psychology to lend credence and credibility to those claims. They were 45-minute sessions with a licensed psychologist who is listening to your problems and offering guidance, but if a confused and starstruck supporter thinks of that as therapy, that's on them. Peterson's like, I don't treat minds, I heal them. It's not technically therapy. In defense of Dr. Peterson, a commenter on the subreddit gave us this little pre-pandemic nugget of wisdom.
Skype therapy is not therapy. If someone told you otherwise, they are bullshitting you. No serious professional would do Skype therapy.
I mean, they def would, but would a serious professional be reselling personality tests they developed to help me understand myself? And by developed, I mean he charges you $10 to take the Big Five personality test, which was actually developed by psychologists in the 1940s and given the Big Five moniker by psychologist Lou Goldberg in 1981. Or was developed over 3 decades by Brooke Air Force Base starting in 1961, depending on who you ask. That's how pedestrian and ubiquitous the Big Five test is. There are multiple origin stories for it. There's a link in the description to a free version of the test if you don't want to give like a millionaire grifter more money. Personality tests, like the 16-point Myers-Briggs type indicator, have long been decried as about exactly as scientific as the Buzzfeed quizzes to find out which Pretty Little Liars or Buffy character you are. Aspirationally, Willow Emily. In actuality, probably Andrew and Arya. Unscientific as they may be, that doesn't stop companies from using personality tests to decide who to hire or how much to pay them. Because most business owners, and I cannot stress this enough, not scientists, not smart, not good people. But the Big Five test, which measures things like agreeableness, conscientiousness, and extroversion based on self-reporting, has long been considered the gold standard of personality tests. Under the right circumstances, it can be relied on to be fairly accurate when it comes to spitting out results that reflect what someone already knows about themselves. Like which house someone's going to get sorted into on Pottermore. But even the Big Five has received criticism about its reliability, especially when taken by respondents in non-weird, Western-educated, industrialized, rich and developed countries. A study comparing results in weird and non-weird countries discovered that in many developing countries, people tended to agree more than disagree with the Big Five statements, which analysts coined an acquiescence bias. Researchers aren't entirely sure why it happens, but one of the researchers on the study, economist Rashid Lajaj, posits that it could be because people in non-weird countries simply aren't as used to taking personality tests as people in weird countries.
Someone who isn't used to taking such surveys, say a farmer in India, might think, what do these guys want from me? Or how will this information be used? If you're already worried about the test, you might be less willing to disagree with its statements, as some people might not agree because they want to look better.
There's also the issue of consistency and replicability. People who retake the test don't always yield the same results. So, in the interest of curiosity more than anything else, I decided to perform a little experiment and take Jordan Peterson's version of the Big Five test. My co-writer Hoots took the free version of the Big Five test, and our podcast co-host, Mandy, represented our control group and just went about her life, not wasting any of her finite time on this earth doing shallow personality quizzes, pushed by amateur Jim Henson impersonators. The major difference between the generic Big Five test that Hoots took and the Jordan Peterson version I took is that Peterson is more detailed and significantly more wordy when unpacking the meaning of each result. For example, Hoots' score on conscientiousness reads,
high scorers tend to be reliable, well-organized, self-disciplined, careful. Low scorers tend to be disorganized, undependable, negligent. Your percentile, 6. You probably have a messy desk.
Meanwhile, mine,
which is the primary dimension of dutiful achievement in the Big Five personality trait scientific model. Conscientiousness is a measure of obligation, attention to detail. Moderately conscientious people are dutiful. They tend to slog away at a task until finished. They work reasonably hard and do not waste time. They are less moderately industrious people are quite likely to judge shirkers or people who are incompetent in a negative manner. They tend to believe that people fail because they don't apply themselves or work However, as creative endeavors often require mess, disruption, and intervening, are more likely to be political conservatives, particularly when low in openness to experience. The latter is the best predictor of conservative belief.
My section on conscientiousness is over 1,000 words long, many of them very repetitive. The entire document is a whopping 16 pages, whereas Hoots's was 1, and the entirety of her results fit into a couple paragraphs. Both tests required that you signify a binary gender. I took my test as a man, as that's how Peterson would see me, and Hoots took hers as a woman. But only Peterson's consistently compared every result to results typical of women and liberals. Peterson's version had some things to say about me as well that were hilariously off base.
They feel minimal pity for those who are excluded, punished, or defeated, and attribute such problems to weakness or inability.
Yes, 'tis I, whomst 'tis the one that doesn't support the marginalized. You got me.
They cooperate grudgingly, and only when cooperation is in their clear self-interest, preferring competition with its well-defined losers and winners.
Nothing says anti-cooperation like being a commie.
People exceptionally low in agreeableness are therefore less likely to suffer from resentment or to harbor invisible anger.
I literally hold grudges from elementary school. Like, what? Natalie K., you are not forgiven.
And what this appears to mean is that agreeable people strongly identify with those they deem as oppressed, seeing them essentially as exploited infants, and demonize those they see as oppressors, seeing them as cruel, heartless predators.
No, not demonizing oppressors. Won't somebody think of the oppressors? This is coming from a man who edits his tweets to be less inclusive on purpose. You could not make this shit up. If you want to read the rest, I posted the full results for patrons on my Patreon. One of the more damning issues with Jordan B. Peterson is that he likes to discuss details of his clients in public. A lot. A little quirk of the good professors that has always drawn some level of scrutiny on account of that whole patient-client privilege thing. Ethics, you know? One occasion where Peterson decided to bring up details of a former client occurred at a talk at the University of British Columbia in early 2018.
You know, I've also been accused 3 times in my career of sexual impropriety, and that, you know, there were baseless accusations. And the last one, it really tangled me up for a whole year. It's not entertaining.
The subject of the last accusation recognized details of her case in Peterson's public comments. The dates lined up. But Samantha, not her real name, said that the complaint she filed against Peterson was not about sexual impropriety.
That is not what this is. This is not that. This is about a bad doctor who didn't do his job, and I got hurt.
Samantha's complaint of misconduct filed with the CPO paints a picture of a man growing increasingly distant and distracted from his clinical practice with the rising star of his public persona. Beginning in 2016, Peterson began canceling appointments with various clients, citing sickness, while making podcast and television appearances with dates that seemed to line up with the canceled appointments. And listen, I am known for loving a good game of hooky as well as the next F slur. If I was getting invitations to appear on national and international news to rip on lobsters or whatever, I'd also call out of work. But my job is like podcaster, not psychologist. No one is going to K-word themselves when I leave them on red unless something goes like very, very wrong. Hopefully we all hold clinical psychologists to more rigorous standards than content creators. In one session on September 27th, 2016, Samantha described Peterson as distracted, describing having to wait for him to finish writing an email before they could get on with her therapy.
He made me sit there while he did an email and he said, "It can't be helped."
And that was the same day he'd published his infamous Professor Against Political Correctness Part 1 YouTube video, opposing Bill C-16, the trans one. So there's a non-zero chance he was checking his comments and analytics when he should have been working, which also same.
Because if they don't, then a bunch of terrible things happen. First of all, you start losing track of who the angry people are. Second, they don't get to say what's on their mind and even listen to themselves. They don't get to have other people tell them that they're wrong. They don't get to modify their viewpoints. Because talking is thinking, you know, and if you stop people from talking, then you stop them from thinking, and that's a really bad thing. And then if you If you interpret hate speech too broadly, then you drive the
Samantha, who had been seeing Peterson since June of 2016, started to develop an attraction to him, a common psychiatric phenomenon known as transference. She made Peterson aware of her feelings in October of 2016. Peterson praised her for disclosing her feelings, encouraging her to be open with him about such things.
That's something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on.
Samantha was eager to discuss it in her next session, but Samantha says Peterson canceled her appointment on October 26 in an email sent early that same morning, citing illness. That same afternoon, Jordan Peterson was in TVO's Toronto studios taping an episode of The Agenda with Steve Peikin. When Samantha replied to Peterson's email offering a list of dates to reschedule, she received an auto-reply.
Hi, thank you for writing. At the moment, I am unable to keep up with my email correspondence, although I will try at some point in the future to respond personally. If you are emailing me about current PC-related issues, you could consider sending your comments to the following individuals. Remember that the only way that any of this can be straightened out is through careful, articulated, and reasonable arguments. I would say that the vast majority of the letters I have received have been exactly that, and it's just what is needed. Assume rationality on the part of the recipients and make a careful case. We want to play in the court of reason. CC a copy to me, if you wish.
And then he listed a bunch of email addresses of UofT professors and administrators he likely wanted his followers to flood with messages, or possibly harass. Samantha continued to see Peterson for another couple months until December of 2016, but the sessions became more and more focused on Peterson's growing celebrity.
He was pretty giddy about all this stuff. It was certainly no concern for me. Everything was focused on him.
On December 11th, Peterson sent Samantha an email requesting her phone number for his records. She provided it, despite already giving it when she first became his client. Then, a few hours later, she was BCC'd a second email.
Subject: Dr. Peterson on vacation until end of year. Hi. I've been in the middle of a political storm, as many of you may know. I've decided to take a break until the end of the year, so my clinical appointments are suspended until early January. I will be in touch in late December to make new appointments for the new year. Until then, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Dr. Peterson.
The message did not provide information for patients who might require assistance while he remained unavailable, such as referrals to other psychologists or links to mental health resources. And this is what the CPO initially took issue with, launching an investigation and advising Peterson to amend his email practices. On December 13th, Samantha emailed Peterson and advised him that she would not be returning for his services in the new year. His reply was curt.
Please accept my best wishes.
In her complaint to the CPO, Samantha recalled Peterson coming to the restaurant she worked at with his wife and some guests while she was on duty the month after she stopped seeing him. Samantha claimed she mentioned her work several times during her sessions with Peterson, and in one of the last ones, he specifically asked her which of the franchise locations she worked at. Samantha was deeply distressed by Peterson's presence at the restaurant and refused to serve him.
I burst into tears in the back, had to be taken off the floor early. My bosses have never seen any such behavior from me and took careful note. I did not serve his table. I did not engage him in any way.
Peterson told the CPO panel that he neither remembered she worked at that location nor saw her there, but he did agree to stop visiting that location after that. Over the course of January, Samantha made several requests for appointment receipts to Peterson's email address, all of which were met with the same auto-reply.
I am trying to answer the majority of the emails that I am receiving. Many people are sending me carefully thought through, heartfelt, and often profound letters, as well as words of support, which I appreciate and which have been practically very helpful. However, I literally cannot keep up. A few days occupied with other matters, and I am hundreds of emails behind. Please do not presume that your email is unwanted or unwelcome, or, indeed, in most cases, unread. And please do not feel slighted if you do not receive an answer. I would like to answer every letter, but it is simply impossible to do that and to maintain my other obligations. If you are writing a letter and you would allow me to make it public, please indicate, and also whether you would want identifiers stripped away beforehand. I would like to make an accessible archive of such writing, partly because so much of what I have received is such high quality. Many of you have also been concerned about the volume of hate mail that I might be receiving. I have received a total of 3 negative letters, none of which could be truly considered hate mail. That's it. For the last 4 months. Perhaps I have received something approximating 2,000 letters of support over that time period, so that's a pretty good ratio, you know? Truly, thank you for writing. Sincerely, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson.
Samantha would eventually learn via a Toronto Life profile of Peterson that his wife Tammy worked as his assistant and handled all of his media requests. Samantha worried that Peterson's wife might have had access to the email she sent Peterson expressing her feelings for him and was humiliated. Peterson attempted to reinitiate therapy with Samantha around this time and requested that Samantha CC Tammy if she wanted to set up an appointment. After that, Samantha began making her receipt requests via text. Peterson responded in mid-March.
I don't use text. That's the reason for the delay, and you have to use email. It's best to CC Tammy, who helps me schedule and keep track of what is vital. She knows nothing about you except that you are a client. I am, as I said, inundated with emails and other requests, so this is the way it has to be right now, as I have no other solution.
The CPO shared Samantha's concerns about privacy, and as part of their findings, they recommended that Peterson should inform patients that staff might have access to some of their personal information and have patients sign consent forms to that effect. Of all the horrible things he has said and done, his treatment of Samantha and his other patients is among the most reprehensible and irresponsible. He was willfully abandoning patients to appear on BBC and Joe Rogan. He has shuttered his private practice and is retired from his professorship, but he still speaks publicly about former patients and students. Giving enough details and specifics, it's easy for the patients, or potentially their family, friends, or employers, to identify them. And his attempts at anonymizing don't seem to go very well, given that he released a PDF with a faulty censor on all of the personal details of all of his complainants, and tweeted out to his, over 1 million followers? Effectively, should any of them want to look, doxing them. It doesn't really matter how good of a therapist he is, and based on the accounts I've read and the totally not therapy paid sessions he offered his Patreon patrons, there's no real reason to think that he is. His tenuous relationship with ethics should disqualify him from the field alone. So here we are, 6 years after Samantha submitted her complaint to the College of Psychologists of Ontario, and the CPO is once again investigating complaints filed against Jordan B. Peterson. This time by a number of his peers about his, let's say, unprofessional tweets.
Sorry, not beautiful, and no amount of authoritarian tolerance is going to change that. You're free to leave at any point.
Such fun and unbelievable techno-nightmare CCP! Hell!
The main concern seems to be Peterson using his platform to promote pseudoscience like climate change denialism, vaccine conspiracies, and enforced monogamy as a cure-all for misogynistic violence, all under the guise of being a doctor and a psychologist. There's also significant concern surrounding his abject cruelty on social media platforms and how fitting it is for a psychologist to tweet out hateful rhetoric directed at groups of people or individuals, including those experiencing mental health crises.
ER visits for self-harm among teen girls have doubled since 2009 #TeensInTech, but they identify as deserving of such harm, don't they?
Hey, Jordan, the jokes have less impact when I have to spend a second trying to figure out what the joke even is. He's trying to draw the comparison between two mental illnesses, like allowing someone to transition is allowing them to cut themselves. But they identify as deserving of such harm is clunky and impenetrable phrasing. Bless these nerds for being so consistently basic, they'd have so much more sway if they were, ever actually funny. The point here is, if Jordan Peterson still identifies as a clinical psychologist, he really shouldn't be making any jokes about mental illness, especially publicly. The reason I really like this joke Jordan Peterson tweeted out is because it's so revealing about his objective as a psychologist. Never mind that often transition is treatment for dysphoria, and trans people who are allowed to present the way they want are straight chillin', while people who self-harm will often escalate if left untreated. He isn't really concerned with patients' inner lives or contentment. It appears that his primary concern as a psychologist is not with making people happy, but with making them superficially presentable participants in his hierarchical conservative world template. He's also sold himself on demagoguery. He's marketed himself as the man with the answers. He explicitly increases his profits if you believe that he is the one with the solutions. So discrediting and disparaging the work that forms the consensus of his peers is directly tied to his income. He's like, not other girls-ing. This tweet is such a tell, such a peek at the man behind the curtain that even his own fans are starting to find his cruelty staggering.
Wow. Your most heartless tweet to date. I once found your podcast interesting and inspiring. What happened to your mind? Your moral compass, your integrity? Watching you unravel is so tragic.
It should be said that the only people fear-mongering about Jordan Peterson potentially losing his license to practice psychology are Peterson himself and right-wing tabloids. It's unlikely that the CPO will do anything other than send a strongly worded suggestion that Jordan please stop tweeting. But Peterson's alarmist rhetoric is in service of his brand. He doesn't actually need his license because he doesn't actually have any intention to continue his work as a psychologist. Dr. Phil took a similar path to media stardom as Peterson. He achieved his PhD in clinical psychology at the North Texas State University in 1979, but eventually found that he made a lot more money as a public personality and grifter. Phil, however, stopped renewing his license in 2006 because he no longer practices. And does anybody care? Absolutely not. As far as the world is concerned, he's still Dr. Phil, that TV psychotherapist who cures wayward teens with tough love. If Jordan B. Peterson ever loses or gives up his license, it will be much the same. But for now, the license is a resource of victimhood that can be tapped. As long as he can use it to claim that the liberal establishment are trying to silence him, he will. Because every little critique, every criticism, every think piece, every investigation drives donations, drives speaking engagements, drives book sales, controversy sells. So every minor conflict must be inflated into full-blown catastrophe. Is Jordan B. Peterson a bad psychologist? Yes, but he's something even worse than that. He's a messy-ass drama queen. Thank you so much for watching to the end. If you like this video, please subscribe, like, comment, share. All of those things make a huge difference because the algorithm kind of freaking hates me. Also, by the time this airs, my expenses will just have gone up around $800 a month due to rent. So I'd love it if you slithered on over to patreon.com/Caelan Conrad, where you can support my channel and get ad-free access to videos without sponsors, as well as perks like your name in the credits of the videos or the ability to hide an item somewhere on my next set. Also, when I take down older videos, I usually leave them up on there. So there are extra videos you can check out, old essays, a short film, as well as the results of the personality test I took for this video. I'm still not even making minimum wage with how many hours I sink into each video. I don't have to, but I love it. It's a lot of work, so any help is appreciated. You can also subscribe to my podcast, Respect the Dead, where we drag the corpses of everyone's least favorite dead people, like cult leaders or religious leaders or titans of industry. Anyway, thank you, bye. You should watch this video next. It's dope as hell. I'm obsessed with how it turned out. See it? Watch it. Click on it. Yeah. Yeah, click on it.